Why don't you just turn to the person next to you and say, wow, isn't it amazing to hear how good God is? So turn to the person next to you and say that. Great. So since the start of the new year, we have been looking at what it means to set different goals for 2025. That means that it doesn't just become like any other year. We've looked at what it means to stop, to try less and party more, to mess up, to wait around. And last week, we looked at the idea of letting go. And this morning, I'd love to spend just a couple of minutes looking at what it might mean to have an attitude that brings blessing this year. For us to take on the Jesus attitudes from that passage that Emily read requires us to learn to take an upside-down view of all the world tells us that we should aim for. And I just wondered, is there someone here this morning that feels confident in their ability to stack some boxes? It's all you need to do, an ability to stack some boxes. Yeah, mate, you think you've got an ability to stack? Come on then. I feel like he might need some help. Does anyone else want to help him? Anyone else want to help? Yeah, come on then. All you have to do, so all you need to do here is stack the boxes in order from the biggest at the bottom to the smallest at the top, okay? Biggest at the bottom, smallest at the top. Brilliant, well done. So, very tight. No, you need to stay there. You can have a little clap. You've got a few more things to do. So the world tells us, blessed are the rich, blessed are those who have everything, blessed are those who are happy, and we climb our way to the top. But Jesus' attitudes offer us an upside-down way of thinking. So all you need to do now is stack the boxes from the smallest to the tallest. Good work, it's nice and steady. So Jesus said, blessed are the poor, blessed are the hungry, blessed are those who are sad. And so in the passage we heard today, Jesus lays out for us attitudes that offer new standards of behavior. For the people listening to Jesus teach this 2,000 years ago, it marked like a radical new way of thinking about what brought blessing in your life. For the Jews who were listening, they had understood that blessing was found in like outward observance of the law, so doing certain things in certain ways. But in this sermon that we heard read today, Jesus marks a new way of thinking. Now, blessing was brought about by inward character. It's not just that these attitudes were different from the world's. It's not just that they were countercultural. It's not just that they looked the opposite to what the world would tell you. It actually flips everything that they understood on their head. Now, I have some goggles. Now, one of you is going to have to choose if you wear these goggles. Who would particularly like to wear them? They're yours, mate. I think she's passed up on the fashion statement that they are. So these goggles, if you put them on, he says, please don't laugh at him. These goggles, if you put them on, so they've got mirrors in them, which flips everything upside down, okay? So right now, you're probably a little bit disorientated, you look brilliant, by the way. They look great on you. So now all you need to do, and this is where you're going to need a little bit of help, I think. You might need some verbal direction. All you need to do now is put the boxes the right way up again with those on, okay? Very good. Nice work. Yeah, the table is there. Well done. You're having to use your hands a lot more for this to work out what's where. Good work. You're doing this really well. Brilliant. That's it. Well done. You can take a bow. You can take those off if you like. Amazing. You can have a seat. Well done. You have great ability in stacking boxes. Well done. You actually did that surprisingly well. I had a go with these at home, and I couldn't actually manage it. Like you're fumbling around. So if anyone ever tried writing with their non-dominant hand, so I'm right-handed, and I've tried writing with my left hand, and I find it really frustrating because I know I can write, but with my left hand, I really, really can't write at all. That's a little bit like what these glasses feel like, these goggles feel like. It feels like you should be able to do this task quite normally, but actually it's quite difficult, although you did make it look very easy. Well done. So the Jesus attitudes, they call us to an upside down, back to front way of thinking. All that we think that we should be able to do or could do are lost in an entirely new way of thinking and being. And the reality is that the simple task of stacking boxes became that little bit more complicated. You had to use your hands a lot more to feel your way around, because what you were relying on before was your sight, and it wasn't the same. Did you know that if you were to keep wearing these goggles, if you so chose to, that if you kept them on for maybe a month, your brain would begin to adapt and to work out this new way of looking at the world? And there was actually an experiment done, and in a matter of a few weeks, someone actually learned how to ride a motorbike with these goggles on. I hope it was a safe way of riding a motorbike, I'm not entirely sure. But you see, it's incredible that our brains have the capacity to think of an entirely new way of processing. But to begin with, it's actually really difficult. It requires a choice to continue to have the same perspective. It requires not giving up when it feels frustrating. It requires choosing to learn a new way of looking at the world. And you see, following Jesus' attitudes are actually quite difficult, even though the statements seem really simple. Blessed are the poor, or in Matthew's version of the Beatitudes, it says, blessed are the poor in spirit. Basically, it's a way of saying, blessed are people who recognize that they have nothing without God. But living out that attitude is really difficult in a world where we celebrate achievement and ambition, where we celebrate that having money or owning the coolest thing is important. And so it becomes difficult to recognize that we have nothing without God when there are so many things that we might work hard to get better at, or work hard to have or to own. It can feel easier to take off the Jesus attitude, to take off the goggles and say, do you know what? Actually, blessed are the rich. In the passage it said, blessed are you who are sad, because you will know God's comfort. It's really difficult to see value in that. We live in our world where we might feel a little bit worried about showing people that we feel sad. Sometimes we even say sorry for crying in church. Sometimes on our social media, we only show people the very best highlights of our life. It's difficult to see that there's blessing in being sad when our sadness is accompanied by pain or grief or longing for something just to be different. It can be simpler to take the new way of thinking off, take those goggles off and say, do you know what? It makes way more sense to say, blessed are the happy. Blessed are you who hunger for God, because he will feed you. It can feel like a really difficult thing to understand and put ourselves in a position of understanding, because we live in a part of the world where in a really real way we are quite well fed, not just with food, but with opportunity to learn and to grow. There are so many things that we get to have a go at and can fill our satisfaction. Even if we know ultimately it's not going to really satisfy us, there's so many things that we could try that we can sometimes fill ourselves up with the wrong things. And Jesus says, blessing is now found in taking on these inward character-forming attitudes. And I wonder if the reason is that they're so difficult is because we're not supposed to be able to do them in our own strength, but in God's. Do you know, the reason that there's blessing in being poor is because Jesus offers comfort. The reason there's blessing in hunger is because Jesus satisfies and can fill us up. The reason there's blessing in being sad is because Jesus made us with emotions and meets us in and through them. They're not just attitudes that we can try and live them out to bless others. It's actually how others meet with Jesus through us. Jesus didn't just tell us what his attitudes were. He showed us in the way that he lived his life. And so in the Bible, there's a letter that is written to the church in Philippi, and it says this: in your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Jesus, who, being in the very nature of God, did not consider equality with God something to be used for his own advantage. Instead, he made himself nothing by taking on the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. You see, the Jesus attitude that we're invited into this year is one that doesn't use things for our own advantage, but instead serves others. By feeding the poor, by comforting the sad, by working for peace and choosing to be loving and kind. But even more than that, he gives us his Holy Spirit to help us to do that. In fact, it's only by his Holy Spirit that we get to live out those attitudes in the first place. Our brains have the ability and the capability of learning an entirely new way of thinking and processing. Within weeks of these goggles being worn all the time, someone could safely ride a motorbike with the skill and the hand-eye coordination that is required to do that. Let's be a church this year that chooses to learn together what it means to have Jesus' attitude, that chooses to not just demonstrate that we have a different view to the world, but that lives it out in our own thoughts and processing too. Because there is blessing on offer. That's what the passage tells us. Jesus is the one who ultimately comforts us. Jesus is the one who satisfies us. Jesus is the one that understands our emotions that make us human. And so when we ask the Holy Spirit to help us to live out these attitudes, what we show to the world is who Jesus is. When I was practicing with these goggles at home, what I found was that the easiest way not to get disorientated and muddled when I was trying to do some simple tasks, I was literally in my office trying to stack boxes with these on. What I found the easiest thing to do was to pay attention to things that were close to my body first. The further out I looked, the more disorientated I got. And I wonder if that might just be something that encourages us this morning as we learn these Jesus attitudes, as we ask the Spirit to help us embody these attitudes when we go into our various places during the week. Start with the things that are close to you before you run and try and do things that are far away. So who will you see tomorrow that you could be intentionally kind to? Where this week might you choose first to work towards peace instead of making your point in the argument? Is there a relative or a friend that you have who might be feeling sad at the moment in time? Maybe they're feeling lonely, that you might be able to send a text to or maybe pick up the phone and have a conversation with. And if you are already well practiced, like many of you are, in living out these Jesus attitudes, how might you begin to serve those who look less like you, where the demands on your time and the amount of effort might be that little bit harder? All the things that the world tells us are weak or worthless, Jesus holds up and he says there's blessing in them. And he invites us to reverse our understanding of all that the world says is good, turning upside down everything that it tells us is worthwhile, and to question and be suspicious of the things that the world says this is worth putting your time and your energy into. Jesus' attitudes offer us an upside-down, right way up, freedom and life-giving way of living that brings blessing, not just to our own lives, but to those around us. And so I wonder this week, which of those attitudes might you take on and try and show and demonstrate who Jesus is through it?